Oh, yeah, there we go. Get whoa! I'm looking for the quick time. One try. Yeah, one try. I remember someone last stream saying like, oh, you're gonna get your ass whooped by Gigas. It's like, got him one try. You ever play a game that you have absolutely zero expectations for? Well, that was me with Stellar Blade. I honestly thought this would be pure coombait appealing to the last few straight men left in the world, or at least it seems that way. But no, it actually surpassed my expectations a little bit. Doesn't mean it's amazing. I think pretty much everyone agrees it's a decent game. Maybe some people even think it's a great game. That's fine. I was decently entertained for about 15 hours, which is more than I can say for most modern games. That said, there's not a whole lot to actually say about it. So this is actually going to be a shorter review for once, which was always the plan, if you listen to the end of my Dragon's Dogma 2 video. If you just want to very briefly know what it is right here in the intro, it's essentially a Souls-lite. Yes, not Souls-like, Souls-lite. It's half Souls game, half generic action game from like 15 years ago. And the further you get in the game, the more it becomes like a older hack and slash, which I certainly see as a good thing. I'm pretty tired of Souls-likes, and this game is definitely easy by Souls standards, that's for sure. If you're looking for a challenge, this is not the game. But I honestly think that's why I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I have always been a strong proponent against hard being good. It was something I talked about a lot in my Elden Ring video, and probably some other ones I'm forgetting on this channel. That said, it might be a little bit too easy. I beat every single boss on the first or second try, because there's a lot of, let's just say, cheat codes to the combat system, little ways to get around perfect dodging or perfect parrying to deal extra damage that you don't really deserve. And that's what's gonna put off the Souls-like fans. So starting off with the gameplay, like I said, it's half Souls-like, half action game. For some reason, a bunch of people were debating me, saying it's not a Souls-like, even though it has a shit ton of Souls-like mechanics, like a dodge with invincibility frames, a perfect parry, enemies have stance meters, attacks are slow and methodical, at least in the beginning, and it has enemy-oriented combat, which to explain simply just means that the player is put on the defensive and you react to what the enemies do. Enemies can have complex movesets, and generally it has a focus around 1v1 combat. Yes, there are gank squad encounters, and in this game they can be fairly infuriating because there's no buffer, there's no invincibility frames between you getting hit, and so if 4 enemies hit you at the same time, that can kill you faster than any boss. More Souls-like mechanics include Estus flasks, a limited number of strong combat items, one of the most blatant uses of bonfires I've ever seen. It's literally this small circular rest area where you rest in a chair and it respawns all the enemies, you know, like a Souls-like. The bosses also feel straight out of any Souls-like, being in a featureless circular arena, and it has the typical back and forth where you block or dodge a series of attacks until it's your turn to attack. So what makes this different from a Souls-like? Well, actually quite a few things. First of all, you actually have basic light and heavy attack combos. In most Souls-likes I've played, for some reason you can't mix light and heavy attack. There's also no stamina meter. You have special beta attacks where you have to get beta energy, insert your jokes here, by hitting enemies. And these strong moves can actually interrupt enemies while they're attacking, including bosses, which gives you a level of interactivity with enemies that is often lacking from a lot of these harder Souls-likes. That was definitely a complaint I had with Elden Ring, is that the combat becomes basically turn-based, unless you're exploiting certain mechanics to deal an insane amount of stagger. This is not one of those games, thankfully. So your beta attacks felt pretty useful and powerful. Unfortunately, you only get 4 of them for the entire game, and you unlock all 4 right at the beginning. Honestly, that's one of my big complaints with this combat in general, is that you only get 1 weapon. unless you count your devil trigger, which you get much later. Yeah, that's another way this isn't really like a Souls game. You just straight up have a super form past the halfway point, but you're stuck with the same light, heavy attack combos and super moves basically the entire game. After a certain point, you get a secondary meter that you build up by perfect dodging and parrying, and with it, you get another set of 4 moves. 3 out of 4 of these are cinematic anime super moves that are obviously pretty powerful, and the 4th one is a buff to your attack speed and damage, which you're definitely going to be using against bosses. Though probably the biggest way that this isn't that much like a Souls-like is the fact that you get a gun fairly early on. And this gun, while it has limited ammo, has a lot of different ammo types. And there's nothing stopping you from using this to just cheeseball a significant number of the difficult encounters in this game. Now, I avoided using it for the most part, partially because the ammo can be pretty expensive, and also just because I don't think it's that fun to just pick enemies off at range. I wanted to play this like an action game, not like a really shitty third-person shooter, but the gun is pretty strong. They try to integrate it into the main combat. There's a specific move where you have to dodge away from enemies at the right time to expose their weak spot, and then you quickly use the gun for massive damage. But there's nothing stopping you from using a couple of the more powerful ammo types to effectively skip or severely weaken the harder gank squad encounters. And maybe that's intentional, I don't know. I guess the point of this segment is just to say that this is definitely much more casual than other Souls-likes, to the point of it not really being a Souls-like, more like a Souls-lite. However, it's not to the point that I would just call it a straight-up hack and slash. This definitely does not play like Bayonetta or Metal Gear Rising or Darksiders or any of those. I've heard people compare it to those games, and I just have to wonder, when's the last time you've played them? And to explain that better, let me just talk about my few issues with this combat system. First of all, there's a lot of animation lag. There's just straight up input delay on your block. We're talking like a quarter second of lag before your block comes out. That is fucking huge for a game where you have to perfect parry attacks. And it absolutely feels awful. You're gonna get hit a bunch of times, and it's not gonna be your fault, because you timed it correctly, but the game artificially delayed when you're allowed to parry. Another thing I hate that almost feels like a bug, it certainly could be, is that sometimes when you get hit in the middle of an attack combo, you have to let go of L1 and press it again to be able to block. And it's not the hit stun preventing you from blocking. No, the game just cancels out your L1 press if you drop your block in the middle of a boss's combo. In fact, if you press L1 twice too quickly, the game won't even read your second block input. This is what I'm talking about. Another issue is because you have proper combos instead of these locked, super limited movesets that Souls games typically have. There are certain attack animations that are considerably longer than other ones, and most of the time this doesn't matter, because when you're fighting the normal enemies, typically when you're hitting them, it's after they've just finished their combo or you parried them, so you're able to finish your attack combo no matter how long it is. But against some of these bosses, they'll start attacking again before your combo is finished, and you can't animation cancel with a block or a dodge. So you'll still be attacking and not even have a chance to block, and then you'll get hit, and that can be incredibly frustrating. Another one of my frustrations with the combat system has to do with the colored attack system. I think for the most part, this is fine. Some people think it's too literal. You should be able to actually watch an attack and know if you can block it or dodge it or whatever. I'm fine with the color-coded system. What I'm not fine with is it feels a little sloppy. So to explain how this works, yellow attacks have to be dodged. You can't block them. Blue attacks also can't be blocked. You have to dodge into the enemy to teleport behind them and nothing personal kid them for a lot of free damage. And then purple attacks, you have to dodge away from the enemy, and this exposes their weak spot, allowing you to shoot them for massive damage. So what's my issue with this? Well, sometimes it seems like the direction you push the analog stick has to be very precise. You can't just point up or down, even if you're locked on. No, you have to push toward the enemy based on whatever its current position is when your sword flashes blue or purple. And again, this could just be a skill issue, but there were plenty of times where I dodged forward and it didn't count because the boss was slightly to the right of me. You see what I'm saying? But yeah, I would say about half of the issues I just named are nitpicks. I think for the most part, the combat system is fun. Generally, the benefits it has over Souls-like combat systems is that you can afford to be a lot more aggressive because the game just isn't that difficult. Even if you do get hit because of the input delay on blocking, you can usually take like 5 hits before dying, so it's really not that big of a deal. I'm a bit mixed on the cheat codes, as I like to call them, whether it be the gun or the usable combat items. Honestly, even healing is kind of a cheat code in this game because you get access to so many. You can have 4 different healing items, and 3 out of 4 you have to buy in shops or find them. But money is common enough, and you're not going to be spending it on that much stuff unless you use the gun all the time. So I never really had an issue filling up all the way on healing. Honestly, most of the times I died in this game is just because a gank squad all hit me at the same time. That's the only time it genuinely feels kind of unfair, or at least annoying. I'd say if you're the type of guy who doesn't really like Souls-likes and wanted to try this game, you'd probably actually enjoy it just because you don't really have to be that good. Like I said earlier, I beat all the bosses in 1 or 2 tries, and in the case of the Juggernaut, I didn't even learn any of his attack patterns. I basically just brute forced it with the sheer amount of healing and overpowered tools I had access to. I mean, less than halfway through this game, you get access to a full revive item. So even if you do fuck up and get killed, you just come right back up with full health against the boss. This game is not hard enough to need this item. I definitely beat bosses I shouldn't have just because of this. To mention one last thing I'm not a huge fan of, this game has fairly low enemy variety, at least for a game like this. As I was playing this, I was reminded a lot of The Surge, and if you're one of the people who played that, you'd know that the game ran out of enemy types about halfway in. Yeah, it introduced maybe like a handful more, but you were essentially fighting the same 20 enemy types throughout most of the game, and Stellar Blade is very similar. Whether you think this is a Souls-lite or just a generic action game with some Souls elements, this is still pretty low enemy count even for a hack-and-slash game from 20 years ago. I mean, yeah, the enemy movesets are more complex than a lot of other games in this genre, but that doesn't really matter. Once I fight the same few mutant demon things about 100 times, I want to fight some new guys. And this is also one of those games that's guilty of giving you a lot of damage upgrades, but then it just sends you more the same enemy type but with more health, so you might as well have not gotten any upgrade in the first place. But yeah, like I said, I still think it's a decent combat system. It's just completely unfocused. It's all over the place. It doesn't know if it wants to be a Souls-like or Bayonetta or Darksiders, Devil May Cry, whatever. It doesn't lean hard into either direction. But the combat's still fun. It's really not that bad. It held my attention for the most part. The lack of enemy variety was the only thing that made me want to quit the game after a while. Now let's talk a little bit about story, characters, and of course sex appeal, which I'm sure is a big reason why anybody would want to buy this game. The story is very minimal, which could be good or bad. Generally, I like games that have minimal story. However, this one is minimal to the point of being almost incoherent. Essentially, it's just Korean Nier Automata. Instead of playing as an android, you play as a cyborg from space that is sent down to Earth to wipe out, well, instead of evil robots, they're like demons that used to be humans. And so you play as Eve, who is one of the most bland female characters I have ever seen in a video game. Now, of course, that's still an upgrade over an insufferable feminist self-insert. But man, is she boring. Even her design is really not that good. Her partner at the beginning, Taki, arguably has a better design, looks more like main character material. Even your engineer assistant that you meet later has a more memorable, iconic design than the main fucking character of this game. I don't know, Eve just looks kind of weird to me. Like she's halfway between an anime girl and one of these South Korean chicks who has extensive surgery to look like a doll. Her jawbone has been completely shaved off, and she just looks bland. I know everyone focuses on her body because she does have a widely appealing body type that basically any man with any testosterone left in their body would be attracted to. But her body also isn't very exaggerated. As you probably know, it was scanned off of a real woman, and so she just looks like a fit, skinny woman. Average size breasts, average size ass, though maybe above average for a Korean woman, let's be honest. I think the only reason people thought she had a big ass is because she has some of the worst pelvic tilt I have ever seen. Just look at a side profile of this character, you can never unsee this. And given the horrors that I've been exposed to on the internet since I was a teenager, this really just doesn't activate the neurons that much for me. It's absolutely a step in the right direction after being exposed to like a decade of LGBT-friendly sexuality. Just look at Baldur's Gate 3, they're still drooling over that gross shit. But it's definitely not extreme enough for me. Another issue for those of us who are less monkey-brained is that Eve just is so bland, it's unbelievable. You can't describe her character because she doesn't fucking have one. So we're all gonna forget about this character in like a month. This is purely a culture war thing. You know it, I know it. I'm not gonna pretend that it's more than it is just because it upsets all the right people. Anyway, back to the game. Your partner gets killed right in the beginning, though not really. Obviously, she was gonna show up again later. And so Eve gets rescued by some generic Asian man named Adam. Adam and Eve. A little bit on the nose, don't you think? And so you fight your way through this post-apocalyptic city and eventually you find the last city of mankind, Zion. Zion. That's interesting too. And you end up going on this grand quest to get these energy cores to restore the city to its former glory. And yeah, of course there's more to the story than that, but it's really minimal, man. I don't think they tried very hard to make it engaging on any level. This is also one of those stories where the plot twist is so heavily foreshadowed that it makes you wonder why they even bothered having twists in the first place. And to talk a little bit about level design, I kind of like the linear levels. They feel like Souls-like levels in the sense that there are shortcuts, you know, doors that are locked from the other side. You can explore little nooks and crannies, fight optional combat encounters to get upgrades. All that stuff's fun. Unfortunately, there's a desert wasteland map that is a somewhat sizable sandbox, at least for a character that has to run around on foot with no vehicles, and it fucking sucks absolute ass. Now, of course, you could skip every side quest and just go to the main objective, and then it's not a big deal, but are you really gonna do that? You're gonna at least see a few of the side quests, and of course, they suck. I just don't understand why they would have this big featureless desert and these little linear paths connecting these mini zones, kind of like a single-player MMO. I guess Koreans can never quite escape the MMO genre. I know I was thinking of Cabal Online, which I played as a kid. The music in this desert is even kind of similar to Cabal. And I guess I could briefly talk about the soundtrack since I don't usually in game reviews. It's pretty good. It's heavily reminiscent of Nier Automata, but not as good. But I still thought it was pretty good. There is a little bit of overuse of vocals, especially in the first area. I got sick of the track that plays there for like 2 straight hours. But I think most of the tracks were enjoyable to listen to. Also, to go back to the sex appeal thing, there are a lot of costumes for Eve in this game, and yes, there was a bit of censorship. I think people maybe exaggerate the importance of this, but I absolutely understand why, because if you give them an inch, they take a mile, right? I honestly don't even understand the point of the censorship because there's plenty of slut clothing in this game, so the fact that they singled out the swimsuit and the Chinese dress, and there might have been 1 or 2 other ones, is bizarre to me. There's also the graffiti, the hard R shop, which I thought was kind of funny, but it was still a reach to say that that was an N-word reference. Regardless, it got censored to the crime R shop, so We can now call them crimers, or wait, that's their word. I guess we have to say crima, which is actually funnier if you ask me, but regardless, there are certainly some of you who would like to know if the game was censored, and sadly, it was at least partially censored, and there's a huge petition with like 50,000 people who signed it to try and reverse it, but considering it likely came from Sony, I doubt it's going to be reversed. This just seems like a pure display of power on their end. And honestly, that's about all I have to say about this game. Let's just go to the conclusion. Should you buy Stellar Blade? I guess on sale, if this looks fun to you. I thought it was a decent game. I was a bit critical of the combat system, as I typically am, because I don't play video games to play dress up with a glorified Korean Barbie doll. Eva's an incredibly bland character, and she's not Coomer enough for me to make up for that. And so I'm playing this for the combat, as anybody should be. And while the combat was decent, it's certainly no Metal Gear Rising. And because of the generally low enemy variety, it's not as engaging as Dark Souls either. But I still think it was fun enough to hold my attention. I like that you got significantly more powerful abilities over the course of the game. That was definitely a good move. You don't see that too often anymore. A lot of modern AAA games just front load you with all the cool abilities in the first 5 hours, and then you barely get any new ones in the next 20. This game actually evolved as I was playing it, but it's certainly rough around the edges for the numerous things I talked about in the combat section. But I think it should be clear to anybody who's being honest with themselves and playing this with a critical eye that the game is certainly missing something. I think it's a good start, but if this ever gets a sequel, first of all, we need a better protagonist, or at least a better written protagonist. And they need to add a lot more to the game. And I would also prefer if they lean in either the action game direction or the Souls-like direction. Trying to please both sides doesn't really work. You just end up with this pseudo-casual experience. But again, I still enjoyed my time with the game. It's probably the third best game I played this year, behind Dragon's Dogma 2 and, well, a game I'm embarrassed to say the name of. It's called Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom. It is a 3D platformer where you play as a taxi, and that game is actually surprisingly pretty fun. But for obvious reasons, I'm not going to do a video on it because none of you guys would watch it. But regardless, third best for us now moving into the 5th month of the year. That's not too bad. It'll probably have a place on top 5 best games of 2024. That's more than I expected. It's very rare that a game with a sizable budget surpasses my expectations. And so, this certainly is not a negative review if anyone wants to claim it is just because I'm critical. No, I ended up actually liking the game. And so, yeah, maybe pick it up when it's half off. That's about it. See you next time, guys.